one and all, and welcome to Seven Kinds of Mischief. I am your host, Stone Loki, and with me today is the one, the only, the doctor of deceit, disaster, and destruction. Did I say deceit? I'm looking for the D's. Adega Outlaw.
Very good evening.
We have got one hell of a show coming to you guys tonight. Usually I am a lot louder, but I am trying something different, something more spooky. I know that's cheesy. Corny. That's B-roll. 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 Get out of the B-roll footage, Loki. But man, we've got one hell of a show tonight, don't we?
I hope so. If you don't mind, I might put you to just a little bit of work. I didn't mention this beforehand, but now I'm thinking of it. I sent you a bunch of pictures earlier today.
Yes.
There is the one with the symbols on it. Just a preview of what's to come. If you might want to share that with everyone. I know it'll take a second or two, but it's something. It's just above the two kids playing. I'm not going to tell people what they're playing.
Okay, give me just.
I'm sorry to put you to task, but
no.
People need to know that we are really working on something.
No, I'm looking.
Some of you may have already seen this before, or gotten bits and pieces of it, and I've only put some of them together.
It's above that or below that?
Just above the two kids playing.
Yeah,
in a little circle.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So the Gmail thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me. I'll just. Let's see here. Okay, and you just want me to open that?
Just the one picture. Yep.
Okay.
That's before I get started with what I have for everybody tonight. I wanted to give a slight, tiny preview of something that will cover multiple lives. Symbolism is everything to these people.
Gmail. It's up. It's up.
Yep, I see it. So, with that, let's go ahead and move on to other things. If you're all right with that.
Oh yeah.
I'm ready to start rolling my first pictures.
All right.
I found something the other day. Quite interesting. Some of you know about it. Some of you don't. Some of you may not know the full extent. And this may be absolute brand new news to a lot of you. And we know that as soon as someone gets in power or a group of people get in power, they tend to do naughty things. It's usually 1 out of 10 leaders, or sometimes 1 out of 20, who are actually good for the people. Several of them don't do anything except enjoy the fruits of being applauded. But the majority tend to do things that are wrong. And we saw a lot of it during World War II. And you heard some stories about what Japan had done. But tonight I'm going to tell you a story, true story, about a place that Japan had conquered in Manchuria. And they called it Unit 731. The image that you're seeing now is from Unit 731. Personnel conduct. A bacterial trial upon a test subject in Nangwon County of the northern China's Jilin province, November 1940. Unit 731 is our subject for tonight. World War II, I'm going to be reading this for you. World War II was beyond horrible for hundreds of millions of people. It's as if all the developed countries of the world, not all of them, but most of them, had surplus rage and hate that they had been stored up, and it all came flooding out in the War of Years. Out of all the areas in which World War II was fought, none were active as long as what would become known as the Pacific Theater. In fact, Japan arguably started the war by attacking Manchuria in 1931, and it inarguably waged war with China by invading in 1937. The disturbances and upheavals that these invasions caused shook China to its very foundations, along with the Communist Party, but it doesn't get into it in this article. It triggered a civil war and a famine that probably killed more population than the entire country of Canada and Australia combined. It ends up to be somewhere around 60 million people. And lasted until the country, China's countries, was liberated by the Soviet Union in 1945. And we did the rest. And out of all the outrages that the Imperial unleashed upon the Chinese people during this brutal occupation, and there were indeed some of the stunning crimes committed, even by World War II standards. There's things like old war movies that you still may be able to see, Ho Chi Minh Trail and different things. Probably none was as gratuitously hateful as the operations of Unit 731, the Japanese biological warfare unit, had somehow plummeted to new depths in what was already a nearly genocidal war. Despite innocent beginnings as a research and public health agency, Unit 731 eventually grew into an assembly line for weaponized diseases that, if fully deployed, could have killed everyone on Earth several times over. All this progress was, of course, built on the limitless suffering of human prisoners who were held as test subjects and waking disease incubators until Unit 731 was disbanded at the end of the war. In a long list of atrocities, these 6 programs in particular stood out in bloody history. Let's see the second picture. Oh, you're going through them way too quick. Let's see the picture of the hands, please. You with me, Loki?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, the pictures of the hands. You need to go back the other way.
All right.
There we are. We're on that one. That is some of the Frostbite experiments. Yorishimo Hisato, a physiologist assigned to Unit 731, took a special interest in hypothermia. As part of the Maratu study, which is basically, we'll explain that in a minute, study in limb injuries, Hisato routinely submerged prisoners' limbs into tubs of water filled with ice and had them held, arms or legs, and frozen solid, and a coat of ice had formed over them before he withdrew them. According to one eyewitness account, the limbs made a sound like a plank of wood when struck with a cane. Hisato then tried different methods for rapidly rewarming the frozen appendage. Sometimes he did this by dousing the limb within hot water. Sometimes it was held close to an open fire. And other times by leaving the subject untreated overnight to see how long it took for the person's own blood to thaw it out. These are all real. All right, now that picture that you had next. There we go. Vivisection of conscious prisoners. That image is a Unit 731 doctor operating on a patient that has been part of a biological experiment. Unit 731 started out as a research unit investigating the effectiveness of diseases and injuries on the fighting ability of the armed forces. One element of the unit was the Maruta took this research a little farther than usual bonds of medical ethics by observing injuries and the course of disease on living patients. At first, these patients were volunteers from the ranks of the army, but as the experiments reached the limit of what could be non-invasively observed, and as the supply of volunteers dried up, the unit turned to the study of Chinese prisoners of war and civilian prisoners. And as the concept of constant went out the window, so did the restraints of the researchers. It was around this time that Unit 731 began referring to confined research subjects as logs, or that word again, maruta in Japanese. They were just considered numbers in logs in a book. Study methods in these experiments were barbaric. Vivisection, for example, is the practice of mutilating human bodies without anesthesia to study the operations of living systems. Thousands of men and women, mostly Chinese communist prisoners, as well as children and elderly farmers, were infected with diseases such as cholera and the plague, then had their organs removed for examination before they died in order to study the effects of the disease without the decomposition that occurs after death. Subjects had limbs amputated and reattached to the opposite side of the body, while others had their limbs crushed or frozen, or had the circulation cut off to observe the progress of gangrene. Finally, when a prisoner's body was all used up, they would typically be shot or killed by lethal injection, though some may have been buried alive. None of the Chinese, Mongolian, Korean, or Russian prisoners assigned to Unit 731 survived their confinement. All right, let's go on to the next picture, please. Weapons tests. The effectiveness of various weapons was of obvious interest to the Japanese army. To determine the effectiveness, Unit 731 herded prisoners together on firing ranges and blasted them from various ranges by multiple Japanese weapons, such as the Nambu 8mm pistol, bolt-action rifles, machine guns, and grenades. Wound patterns and penetration depths were then compared on the bodies of the dead and dying inmates. Bayonets, swords, and knives were also studied in this way, though the prisoners were usually bound for these tests, as the image shows. Flamethrowers were also tested on both covered and exposed skin. In addition, gas chambers were set up at the facilities, and test subjects were exposed to nerve gas and blister agents. Heavy objects were dropped onto bound prisoners to study crushing injuries. Subjects were locked up and deprived of food and water to learn how long a human could survive without them, and victims were allowed to drink only seawater or were given injections of mismatched human or animal blood to study transfusion and the clotting process. Meanwhile, prolonged X-ray exposure sterilized and killed thousands of research participants, as well as inflicting horrible burns when the emitting plates were miscalibrated or held too close to the subject's nipples, genitals, or faces. And to study the effects of high G forces on pilots and falling paratroopers, Unit 731 personnel loaded human beings into large centrifuges and spun them at higher and higher speeds until they lost consciousness and or died, which usually happened around 10 to 15 Gs, though young children showed a lower tolerance for acceleration forces. All right, let's see the next picture of this Japanese General Shiro Ishii, the commander of Unit 731. Syphilis experiments. Venereal disease has been the bane of organized military since ancient Egypt, and so it stands to reason that the Japanese military would take an interest in the symptoms and treatment of syphilis. Those of you who don't know, they called the Korean women prisoners as comfort wives and were treated absolutely horribly. Okay. To learn what they needed to know, doctors assigned to Unit 731 infected prisoners with the disease and withheld treatment to observe the uninterrupted course of the illness. A contemporary treatment, a primitive chemotherapy agent called salvarsan, was sometimes administered over a period of months to observe the effects and side effects, however. To ensure effective transmission of the disease, syphilitic male prisoners were ordered to rape both men and women, fellow prisoners, who would then be monitored to observe the onset of the disease. If the first exposure failed to establish infection, more rapes would be arranged until it did. And the picture of the building. Rape and forced pregnancy. It's one of the facilities there at Unit 731. Beyond just the syphilis experiments, rape became a common feature of Unit 731's experiments. For example, female prisoners of childbearing age were sometimes forcibly impregnated so that weapons and trauma experiments could be done on them. After being infected with various diseases, exposed to chemical weapons, or suffering crushing injuries, bullet wounds, and shrapnel injuries, the pregnant women were subjects of opened up. They were opened up, and the effects of the fetus was then studied. The idea seemed to have been to translate the team's findings into civilian medicine. But if Unit 731 researchers ever published these results, the papers seem not to have survived the years of war. We're on our final picture, Germ Warfare. This is researchers conducting biological experiments with captive children subjects in Nongui County, the northeast China, Jilin province in November 1940. The totality of Unit 731's research was in support of their larger mission, which by 1939 was to develop horrific weapons of mass destruction for use against Chinese population and presumably America and Soviet forces, if the time ever came. To this end, Unit 731 cycled through tens of thousands of prisoners at several facilities across Manchuria, which had been occupied by imperial forces for years. Inmates of these facilities were infected with several of the most lethal pathogens known to science, such as Yersinia pestis, which causes bubonic and pneumonic plague, and typhus, which the Japanese hoped would spread from person to person after being deployed and depopulate the disputed areas. To breed the most lethal strains possible, doctors monitored patients for rapid onset of symptoms and quick progress. Prisoners who pulled through were shot, but those who got sickest fastest were bled to death on mortuary tables, and their blood was used as transfusions with other prisoners, the sickest of whom would themselves be bled to transfer the most virulent strains to yet another generation. One member of Unit 731 later recalled that the very sick and unresisting prisoners would be laid out on slabs so that a line could be inserted into their carotid artery. When most of the blood had been siphoned off and the heart was too weak to pump anymore, an officer in leather boots climbed onto the table and jumped on the victim's chest with enough force to crush the rib cage, whereupon another dollop of blood would spurt into the container. When the plague bacillus had been bred to what was felt to be a sufficiently lethal caliber, the last generation of prisoners to be infected were exposed to huge numbers of fleas. Yersinia pestis preferred vector of contagion. The fleas were then packed in dust and sealed inside clay bomb canisters On October 4th, 1940, Japanese bombers deployed these casings, each loaded with 30,000 fleas that had each sucked blood from the dying prisoners over the Chinese village of Kwasao. Witnesses to the raid recall a fine reddish dust settling on surfaces all over town, followed by a rash of painful flea bites that infected nearly everyone. From contemporary accounts, it is known that more than 2,000 civilians died of plague following the attack, and that another 1,000 or so died in nearby Yaiwei after the plague was carried there by sick railway workers. Other attacks using anthrax killed approximately 6,000 more people in the area. In August 1945, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki had both been bombed, the Soviet army had invaded Manchuria and utterly annihilated the Japanese army, and the emperor read his infamous surrender declaration over the radio. Unit 731 was officially disbanded. Its records were mostly burned, destroying any useful information that the team may have managed to generate in the 13 years of research. Researchers mostly slipped back into civilian life in occupied Japan, as if nothing had ever happened, many of them becoming prominent members of university faculty. To this day, Japan has not apologized for, and China has not forgiven, the countless atrocities Japan forces visited upon China between 1931 and 1945. As the last witnesses to this history grow old and die, it is possible that the matter will never be addressed again. And there you have it.
Dude, I didn't know any of that. I knew they did some wicked shit. I knew they did some really wicked shit, but I didn't know they did that. That's just no. Wow.
History lesson for everyone.
History lesson for everyone.
The things that the defeated hide.
And James Andrew Morrison picks up a good point, because Mexican Iron Man obviously was having a problem listening to some of that. He said, I doubt we will ever know, as we're incapable of thinking like those monsters. I would hope so, James Andrew Morrison, that all of us are incapable of thinking like that. Thank you, Adega, for reading
thanking me for something like that is a little tough to be thanked for, but history is history, and we need to know it so that we don't repeat it.
It is. And I have a story for everyone tonight. High school. We've all been there, right? We've all been to high school. It was my third week at my new high school. You see, I'm used to being the new guy, so it doesn't bother me very much. I'm an introvert anyway. I grew up in the foster care system and had never stayed in one place for too long. I wasn't known as a problem child. I just never bonded with any of my foster parents. They could tell, and my lack of attachment always bothered them. They could send me off and hope that their next foster child would give them the happiness they were looking for. The living conditions were usually substandard anyway. Most foster parents need to be needed, so I never took it personally. I never felt like I needed anyone. It was whatever it was. I was in my junior year anyway, and in just under 2 years, I would be liberated from the system and be on my own. College will be all but free, as they practically beg foster kids to go to college. Nevertheless, I was 3 weeks into classes at my new school, and I had already made an enemy. Jake Pearson. In this suburban high school, these idiots were just like the kids at every other school. A bunch of guys trying way too hard to look cool and tough. And the gaggles of girls who were trying way too hard to stand out by ironically doing the exact same thing that every other girl was doing. These hallways are filled with drama. Drama that is all about looking at these $100 shoes Daddy bought me. People are such bitches. The day I arrived, I knew that Jake would be my problem. Jake was somehow the single most cliche high school jock I'd ever seen, including in the movies. He was tall, built, a ladies' man, and had rich parents. The most standout feature about Jake was his incessant need to act tough all the time. I was never sure if he was compensating for a tiny penis or he just had a really big ego. Maybe the true answer was somewhere in both of these options. Either way, I hated this kid so bad that just the sound of his goddamn voice made me want to move to the next foster home. I was minding my own business one fateful morning when some pathetic nerd had the misfortune of lightly bumping into Jake. Commotion stirred as students all around the hallway gathered to laugh at Jake's bereavement of the scrawny little nerd. "Did you just push into me, Tiny?" he said way too loud, generating the attention of the other idiots. The terrified scrawny kid stammered and garbled his apology. I'm sorry. It was an accident." Before he could finish his stuttering, Jake smacked the large stack of books and binders out of this kid's hands, scattering the books and loose papers everywhere. Laughter erupted from the crowd of idiots. This kid had never heard of a backpack. I saw my opportunity. It was time to set my plan in motion. "I bet you get off by pushing little kids around, don't you?" I spouted out with a laugh. Ooh, and silence fell so immediately that it was comical. As Jake turned around, I could see the blood vein popping out of his fucking temple. This kid had anger problems. I don't think Mommy had ever told him no. "Who the hell do you think you're talking to, new kid?" "Some fucking idiot," I responded without delay. Jake was really about to lose his shit now. He pushed me into the locker and put his face so close to mine that I could smell the spearmint gum and nauseating cologne. I had just insulted him in front of his peers. Jake's primal instincts dictated that he had to ensure everyone saw him as the alpha. Sure, Jake was taller, bigger, and stronger, but what he didn't know is that when it comes to fighting, this ragtag, scrappy kid with fast hands, well, he had been waiting for someone just like him. Also, I knew how to take a hit. When I was 8, my foster home taught me how to be tough the hard way. Jake might be a brute, but I knew how to fight smart and dirty, and that would always beat a brute. I placed my left foot slightly behind his right heel and slammed my shoulder into his chest. As I swiped his foot out from underneath him, the thud as he hit the floor brought shock to the crowd. To purposely add insult to injury, I chimed in with some commentary. "Looks like your dad isn't the only one who beats you anymore." The statement may or may not have been true, but either way, the goal was to get in his head, to live in his head. Fighting is much mental as it is physical. He got up and came bumbling my way, putting all of his weight behind a haymaker that I could have seen coming from 2 blocks away. I ducked as his fist flew over my head and landed right on a locker. This was too easy. It was too beautiful. It was the perfect setup. His back was now turned toward me and his body twisted, providing a perfect angle to go on the offensive. I gave him a powerful knee to his side, aimed precisely to give a blow to the kidneys. Body shots should always be aimed at major organs. Always. That's what causes the most damage. I was rewarded with a grunt of pain as he dropped to a knee, doubling over on his side. I could have stopped there, but I fucking hated this kid, and I wanted him to hate me. The quick and easy but powerful hook, I delivered the final blow. His nose made a crunch under my fist, and I loved every minute of it. Satisfied, I picked up my backpack and went on my way, leaving Jake laying on the ground with blood on his face, surrounded by his baffled audience. I walked straight to the administration office, helping myself to a chair. The lady behind the desk had a nose that pointed upward, displaying her nostrils to anyone and everyone that saw her. She reminded me of a pig. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Pig asked with a high-pitched tone that stank of fake kindness. "The principal is going to want to see me. And soon," I told her with my legs crossed and hands behind my head. "Oh, do you have an appointment?" she asked. I don't understand why this lady feels the need to speak with such a high pitch. God, it reminded me of nails on a chalkboard. No, I stumbled across a bullying incident, and long story short, I broke his nose. The amusing look on her face was somewhere between confused and shocked. "I'll be right back," Mrs. Pig said slowly as she got out of her chair. She disappeared into the back hallway, came out a couple minutes later, being trailed by a tall, trim man wearing a worn gray suit that was almost as old-fashioned as was his ridiculously bushy gray mustache. It was a remarkably good thing. The glorified hall monitor, who was officially called hallway security, came walking in holding the arm of Jake. To my pleasure, Jake was gingerly holding a large wad of blood-soaked paper towels over his nose. There were several drops on his beloved Letterman's jacket. Oh, I do hope it stains. Behind Jake and Mr. Hall Monitor was the stuttering little kid who nearly became Jake's chew toy this morning. I had almost forgotten about him. Stutter shot me a grateful look, but he still remained panicked and terrified. He reminded me of a wide-eyed chihuahua who had just been beaten too many times. He was fucking pathetic. The remaining process took several hours. First, the principal and Mr. Hall Monitor interviewed me while Jake was working on getting his profusely bleeding nose under control. Afterward, they interviewed Stutters, who backed up my story. Lastly, they interviewed Jake, who naturally claimed that I sucker punched him in the hallway. After that, I was forced to call my foster parent, Dean. And now he sat beside me as the principal explained my suspension. Dean wasn't having any of that, though. Lucky for me, he's a lawyer. Not a big-time fancy corporate lawyer, mind you. He was a public defender for the city. Still, his skills would prove useful to me that day. His arrival marked the beginning of a long argument in which Dean laid out the legality of self-defense and ranted about anti-bullying. The school administration refused to show any documentation concerning previous complaints concerning Jake's bullying, which likely meant that it did indeed exist and the school needed to cover up their inaction. After Dean threatened to file a lawsuit and go public, the principal backed down. I was surprised. I've never had a foster parent go to bat for me before. Maybe Dean would prove useful after all of this. Of course, he didn't really do it for me. Dean was nice enough, but I could see that he was only on board with the foster parent thing to appease his wife, Sarah. Assuming that they tried for years to have a child of their own, but for whatever reason, they were unable to. Why or how they ended up with a teenage foster child was beyond me. Sarah was the single most generous foster parent I've ever had, but she had a pathetic need to be loved and needed. I don't share this need, but frankly, my current foster situation was pretty good, and I like part of this town they lived in, so I was all good with that. It's off towards the end of the suburban part of the city, and the woods were nearby. The woods provided me with plenty of quiet places to visit. For this reason, I would play into Sarah's needs for as long as necessary. It was too easy to turn on the grateful orphan persona and allow Sarah to feel, needed. In return, I'd be provided with as cushy of a life as a foster kid could get. Dean and I were now alone in the parking lot. As he reached to open his car door, he stopped and looked at me. "Listen, Rich." Oh, God. Here comes the emotional talk about how he understands that I'm going through a tough time. Blah, 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 yakety smackety. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm impressed with what you did, standing up for a kid that was being bullied. So Let's not tell Sarah about this, okay? Sounds good, Dean. He looked like he was about to give me some kind of an awkward hug, but thankfully he settled with a slightly less awkward fist bump. Apparently, he was touched by my bold display of anti-bullying, saving stutters from the big meanie. Honestly, my actions had nothing to do with defending that spineless little bitch. I don't give two shits about him. I did it because I hated Jake. And stutters, he just gave me the golden opportunity that I wasn't about to waste. The rest of the day was dismal and ordinary. Classes were easy. I didn't do most of my homework, but managed B's and sometimes A's simply by getting good scores on tests. My motivation depended all on the class. Math was easy but boring. My reading teacher was a true moron who loved overanalyzing worthless poetry. But my psychology class, that was actually interesting and useful. At this point, I'd already read the entire psych textbook and continued research on my own. It was helping me understand more about myself. I've been reading about personality disorders, and I saw a lot of myself in this section about psychopaths and antisocial behavior. At this point, I wondered if I myself was a psychopath. It didn't bother me one bit. It just made sense. Being a psychopath is characterized by so many different things, including an inability to feel empathy. This is where I felt uncertain. There was one person, just one, in my past who I've ever truly felt empathy for. Addie. Addie was once my foster sister, but we had been separated when I was 8. I'm not sure if I have the inability to feel empathy for another or if I simply learned not to after losing Addie. So I was walking home. It's only a 25-minute walk. I turned down the back road right next to the woods. Houses were scarce on this road. It was nice, quiet, and out of sight. About 10 minutes into my walk, I realized I was being followed by a maroon Mustang. The car pulled up, and out clambered Jake and 3 of his little minions. A group of idiots who followed Jake, like little neglected dogs hoping to get a compliment from their master. Oh, I can fight, sure, but I'm not stupid either. I was outnumbered 4-1, so I turned and ran for the woods. I'll admit, these kids were fast. I quickly realized that I wouldn't be able to outrun them for long. So I said, fuck it. I'm more about fight than flight anyway. I ducked behind some thick brush and grabbed a hefty but manageable log. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down fucking swinging. Footsteps were arriving quickly, so I swung my log right at victim number 1. Right as they came around the corner, the log connected so hard with his blocky head that it broke in half. Unfortunately, that log was useless now, but the damage had been done, and victim number 1 hit the ground hard. I gave victim number 2 a hard front kick straight to the chest. He grunted as the air escaped his lungs, and he landed on his back with his feet in the air. King Leonidas would have been proud. Ahoo! 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 I dodged the third guy, a fat but strong kid who only knew how to bull rush. That's when the rock connected with my temple. I was on the ground, and I didn't recall the fall. I was getting kicked repeatedly. Blow to my gut knocked the wind out of me, but I grabbed his foot, and I yanked, putting all my weight into his knee. Whoever that knee belonged to shouted in pain. I probably just hyperextended his knee. The rock hit me again, this time in my nose. I was dazed now, but I could see Jake standing over me with a decent-sized stone. All right, let's stop this before it gets too out of hand, someone said. I think it was victim number 2. Shut the hell up, Brian. I ain't done yet. Another 2 kicks hit me hard in the ribs. Okay, seriously, Jake, I think that's enough. Quit being a fucking pussy. Another 2 kicks found their home in my stomach as I struggled to get air in my lungs. Kick him, Brian. Come on, man. He's already almost unconscious. Brian objected. I said kick him. Jake ordered again, looking threatening with the rock still in his hand. I bet you like being his little bitch, don't you, Brian? That sentence flew out of my mouth before I could stop it. I always knew what to say if I wanted to hurt someone. That statement was the last push Brian needed, and his shoe connected hard with my head. My vision was now covered in little black dots. Through my blurry vision, I saw Jake lean down. You're messing with the wrong person, Rich. You best find yourself a new foster home before I make your life so fucking miserable you want to kill yourself. Not that anybody would give a fuck. He stood up, gave me one last kick, then ordered his brainless minions to go back to the car. I watched them leave, one kid limping. Victim number one, just as dazed as I was. At least I did some damage. Despite the pain in my head and my ribs, I laughed. Jake may have won this battle, but I knew that I would win the war. I knew I'd have the last laugh. Jake had no idea what the fuck I was capable of. My limits were beyond the sky. I always win. Sometime later, I made it home. As I walked through the door trying to act natural, it was immediately apparent how haggard I must have looked. Sarah gasped and rushed in to guide me to the couch, demanding to know what happened. There's no way of hiding this now. I might as well tell the truth. Dean would just have to understand. Sarah called Dean, who dutifully came straight home to support his distraught wife. Sarah was choking back tears, and she explained to Dean how I had been jumped. She threatened to call the police and take me to the hospital, to which I objected. I did not need the police to get involved in my war with Jake. If the system finds out about this, they might make me move to a new home. I don't want to move again, please. I pled to Sarah, playing into her emotional state. I think he's right, Sarah, Dean chimed in. Those boys can feel like they're even now. So there is no need to take any unnecessary risk. You know how the system is. Dean had come in clutch again. This guy was proving himself more useful every moment. Sarah nodded in reluctant agreement. It was just too easy to get her to change her mind. But you're not going to school tomorrow, she demanded. You're going to stay home so I can take care of you and make sure you're okay. I reminded myself of how I needed to play into Sarah's need to be needed. So I agreed. For good measure, I gently touched her hand and told her thank you. She allowed a tear to escape after that move. Something was wrong with Sarah. I could see it in her eyes. At some point in her life, she'd had a traumatic experience, and it had hurt her deeply. I woke up late Friday morning to Sarah bringing in fresh breakfast, eggs, bacon, pancakes. My ribs twinged with pain as I sat up and my head pounded too. Sarah was on top of that too, though, offering me 800 milligrams of ibuprofen to be down with some orange juice and a cup of fresh coffee. This treatment was another display that I was not used to. Never, ever had anyone brought me breakfast in bed. After assuring Sarah that the breakfast was wonderful, I told her I was going to rest. After she left, I pulled out the computer that I purchased with the money I stole from my last foster parents. I was pretty good with computers. They were useful and underrated tools that most teens just use to stir up drama on social media and post stupid fake photos. People are so obvious to how exposed their personal information is. It took me less than 2 hours to know everything about Jake and Brian that I needed to know. I had his address, his phone number, and learned the fact that the family was on a trip to their lake house for the weekend, about a 5-hour drive away. Probably his parents' attempt to draw attention away from a school suspension. Rich people in the suburbs are all about their image. That night, after Sarah and Dean were long asleep, I quietly got ready. The house had a security system that monitored and logged every time a door or window opened. Probably did it because they knew I was moving in. Wasn't a problem, though. I easily just detached the device without breaking the magnetic seal. Actually, it was perfect. Security system logs would provide me with a good alibi, should anything go wrong. I exited the house through the window and stepped off on the pre-planned route that would mostly take me through the wooded area and out of sight. I enjoy the woods at night anyway. It's so quiet, so peaceful, just me in the woods. It took me about 30 minutes to arrive at my destination. Jake's house was huge and sat on a lot that must have been 2 acres or more. I searched through the property near the back door, expecting to find a spare key somewhere. They weren't dumb enough to keep their key under the doormat, but they didn't hide it very well either. The rock looked convincing, at first sight, but when I looked at it up close, I could tell that it was a fake. I carefully lifted the rock and found a little compartment underneath containing a key. Just like that, I gained access to their house. Although the house was large and immaculate, it didn't take me long to find the room I was looking for. Jake had a life-size football poster of himself on the door. Oh, that was so sweet. Thank you. X really does mark the spot. His room was huge, the size of a small apartment. I carefully searched for anything that would be of use. On his shelf, designated for keepsakes, I found an old but expensive-looking sheathed knife. The knife had someone's initials engraved in it, signaling that it might be a family heirloom. I picked it up in my gloved hands and pocketed it. Jake didn't seem too worried about his parents snooping through his shit. His computer wasn't even password protected. Thanks to Jake's carelessness, I now had access to all of his personal information, including social media and his chat messages that were backed up to the cloud. This was a gold mine where I would get all the information that I needed. I sat down and boy, did I go to work. You can learn a lot about someone's life by going through their text messages and photos. I found out that Jake and his friends had a certain spot in the woods where they would meet up and drink and smoke weed. Thanks to the photos being geotagged, I now knew exactly where that spot was. More importantly, though, I learned that Jake had pestered just about every girl in school for nudes. If they rejected him, he then pressured and assaulted these girls. When I came across his conversations with Brian, that's when I found my lucky break. Jake had tested his luck with the girl Brian was dating. When she refused his request, Jake called her a whore. After Brian had found out, he finally stood up for himself, and the messages showed they'd had quite an argument. They were not currently on speaking terms, and Jake made it clear that he would not speak to Brian and would ruin his popularity. Oh, this was going to be fun. I had the perfect plan. I saw that Jake and his family would be home Sunday afternoon. Brian's status showed currently active, so I sent him a message through Jake's social media asking him to meet me at the spot Sunday night at midnight. After Brian replied with the letter K, I deleted the messages so Jake would not see them on his end. On my way out, I stole a hoodie, some pants, and an extra pair of gym shoes. I made sure to grab stuff from the back of the shelf to ensure their absence would not be noticed. I took one last look around to feel secure that I left no noticeable trace. After locking the door and carefully putting the key back where I'd found it, I went back home the same way I came, undetected. Saturday and Sunday, I continued to allow Sarah to look after me. It made her feel good, and I needed her to think that I needed her, so I could continue living here. Finally, Sunday night arrived. I put on the clothes that I stole from Jake and headed on my way. I waited in the shadows for Brian to arrive, and about 12:05 a.m., I heard the footsteps approaching. What do you want, Jake? Brian started as he entered the small clearing. We have school tomorrow. Before he could finish, I hit him as hard as I could in the face with a rock. Jake's signature move. Brian fell to the ground, putting his hands on his face as if he would somehow dull the pain. I didn't give a shit. I kicked him in the head and his gut over and over and over again. I watched with pleasure as he rolled around in agony, betrayed and incapacitated. What the hell, bro? Oh, I'm not your bro, I told him. Brian squinted up at the sound of my voice, shocked. He stammered a few disconnected words, trying to catch his breath through the pain when I knelt beside him. What do you mean? Brian finally managed to muster between heavy breaths. Revenge. Looking Brian straight in the eye, I plunged Jake's knife straight into Brian's torso, stabbing him right into the liver. I was rewarded with an agonizing groan from Brian. And to get rid of Jake. Another stab, this time off to the side, making sure I got one of his kidneys. It's not really about you, bitch. Another stab and another moan. You're just on the wrong side of this war. and a convenient means to an end. Drawing in the delectable thrill of the moment, I thrust the knife deeper and listened to Brian's agonizing moans and shortening breath. I stared into his eyes so I could see the look on his face as he realized he was about to die. And you really, truly shouldn't have kicked me. I gave him another hard stab, this one placed just under his left pectoral. The blade slid right between his ribs, piercing his heart. I pulled out the knife as blood spluttered up out of the wound like a fountain. Then I sat back and I admired my handiwork. Brian's breast gurgled and rasped into the silent woods. I realized the attack looked way too clean. Everything was perfect, precise, exactly the way it should have been. I needed this to look like a stupid brute had lost his temper. I gave a dozen or so mortally, wildly placed stab wounds, ranging in depth. That looked a lot better. In less than a minute, the groans and breathing stopped. He lay there, or his body did at least, covered in blood. I dragged Brian's body and hid it with some thick brush where I covered him in branches and leaves. Took my time to make sure that it looked sloppy and hasty. I hid the knife about 100 feet away, knowing full well that the police would scour the area. I took off the hoodie, sweatpants, and shoes and deposited them in a park garbage bin that was just a yard off the wood line, about a half a mile away from the scene. I'd worn long layers underneath Jake's clothes and made care to never touch his clothes with my skin. I even wore a swimming cap to make sure my hair didn't get anywhere. The only evidence left that could tie me to the crime was the pair of latex gloves that I had worn to avoid getting fingerprints on the knife or blood under my fingernails. I made it back home with the same stealth I'd used the previous night. I quietly went into the bathroom where I soaked the latex gloves in bleach, scrubbing them until they were spotless. After flushing the toilet to make sure Dean and Sarah would believe I was just taking a bathroom break, I used a little more bleach to vigorously wash my hands and then topped off the bottle with some water so it wouldn't seem that any had been used. Finally, it was bedtime and I was exhausted. God, murder is such hard work. Seemed like only a couple of minutes later when my alarm went off. I hurried to the bathroom and took one more hard look to make sure the gloves and cleaning supplies were in their proper places. I then took a scorching hot shower, scrubbing every part of my body with vigor just in case. I then relaxed and used the rest of the time to reflect on the kill. Sarah insisted on taking me to school, seeing as I had been jumped just last week. In my reflection, I found it interesting that I felt enjoyment out of the kill this time. I didn't recall the same satisfaction from my first. Maybe that was because the day I lost Addie, I was 8, finally understood what my alcoholic foster father was doing when he was going into my sister's room and locking the door. Addie was only 6. One night when he was drunk, I put a revolver in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Police ruled it as a suicide. I hadn't seen Addie since. We were sent to new homes. She's the one and only person I remembered ever feeling any love for. School started the same, business as usual. By the second period, the Gossip News Network was buzzing with the news that Brian's parents had reported him missing. By lunch, it was common knowledge. The best part happened just as school was getting out. I could see and hear the commotion from down the main hall. I walked over, peering over the crowd of idiots, all trying to get a good video on their flip phones. 3 police were forcing out a handcuff and panicked Jake. He protested. He resisted, but the police overpowered him and forced him into the car. Oh, it was everything I could do not to completely lose my mind in laughter. And I couldn't help but smile. By the 6 o'clock news, it was a headline story. Breaking news: Jacob Pearson, a local high school athlete, charged with the murder of classmate Brian Jones. I had a hard time holding back my satisfactory smile, but Dean and Sarah were in the room. I already had Sarah wrapped around my fucking finger, but for good measure, I told her that Jake was the kid that attacked me. I put on my best scared orphan face. That could have been me, Sarah. It could have been me. I told her, forcing myself to sound scared. Her heart melted, and I received instant sympathy as she pulled me in for a tearful hug. Dean, being a public defender, was in the know. He also believed I was scared, offering me comfort. It'll be tough to defend that one, he assured me. Jake will be going away for a long time. I mean, the prosecutors, they have everything. The body, the weapon, the fingerprints, even motive. It's like someone handed the AG this case on a silver platter. Oh, indeed I had. It was the next day that Sarah and Dean sat me down and told me that they wanted to push forward with adopting me. I had gained their trust and, more importantly, their sympathy. I'd now be able to live in this cushy home with pushover parents until college. Even then, they'd send me money and give me a place to stay in the summer. They were good-natured idiots, but useful idiots. What a success my first month in my new home had been. I locked in my preferred living situation and got rid of the only problem with my new neighborhood, Jake. The best part is, Jake hung himself in jail before the trial even started. The police called it good, certain that Jake was their man, and the case was closed. I still laugh when I think back to when Jake told me that he'd make me want to kill myself. Like I said, I always win. And ladies and gentlemen, if you liked this story, which is called The Journal of a Psychopath, High School, get ready because University is next. The story was written by R.M. Staniforth and is on Creepypasta. Now it is called Journal of a Psychopath, High School. Next week, we will be reading Journal of a Psychopath, University.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, that was so fun. That was so fucking fun to read that. Holy shit, I loved it. I was like, yes. I was just like salivating in the evilness of the whole thing. I love getting to play the bad guy.
I was going to type it out in chat. I was thinking, I'm looking at Loki's avatar and thinking, he is feeling that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You damn right. Oh.
Oh, what a dark evening we've weaved.
Oh, shit, man. I absolutely love it. I absolutely love that. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for being here. Adega, thank you so very much for the story about the camp in World War II.
Real stuff.
Wow. Thank you, brother. Seriously. Thank you. Guys, thank you so very much, everyone, for being here. I absolutely love getting to do these. I can't wait till next week. We will catch you guys. We will be back in 1 week. Adega will have more truth bombs to kill us all with. And I will be playing the role of a psychopathic murderer. Oh, and thank you, Mr. Tickle Trunk, for the $5 super sticker. It's a Yorkie clapping its hands, saying bravo. Skull. Thank you, Mr. Tickle Trunk. Thank you, everybody. Let me give everybody a skull before we get out of here. Everybody who sent in the super chat tonight, skull!
Spartans! What is your profession?
Yes! All right, everyone take care. Have a great night, and we will catch you guys next time on 7 Kinds of Mischief.
These videos are tremendous. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hammer that notification bell.